Hello, I'm Matt Carpenter, and this is the Good Life Podcast. Hello, welcome to the Good Life Podcast. I'm Matt Carpenter, and I am grateful today to welcome Dr. Donald Williams on. Dr. Williams is the Professor Emeritus at Toccoa Falls College in Northwest Georgia, and he is an ordained minister in the Evangelical...
Northeast Georgia, actually.
Northeast Georgia, okay, excuse me.
East is the direction towards the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay, that's right, thank you. I appreciate that. I was getting it totally backwards, but anyway.
If you look for us in Northwest Georgia, you'll end up at Covenant College, which is not a bad place to be, but it won't be Toccoa Falls.
Yes. He's a minister in the Evangelical Free Church in America, and he's written books on theology, literature, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien. He is, I believe, an editor at Touchstone magazine. So, magazine is very dear to me, but also many people do not know he is a wonderful poet as well. I've read several of his poems and enjoyed them immensely. Dr. Williams, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So I want to begin by talking about your book, Mere Humanity, where you discuss what it means to be human, and you bring in three notable sages from the past, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and G.K. Chesterton, to help us understand how to answer the question of what it means to be a person. So, right now, people seem desperate to find an answer to that question. So you talk about this in the book, which was published a few years ago, but what is driving the desperation of people to understand what it means to be human?
Well, everything seems to be up for grabs now. You got people who can't tell what a woman is if they don't have a PhD in biology, because all of the traditional assumptions have been wiped away and not replaced with anything. So we now have the autonomous self that is trying to create itself, rather than believing that God created a world that has a certain structure and a certain meaning. Now it's like the existentialists of the early 20th century have won. There is no set meaning. We're just here, and whatever we decide we want to be is what we're going to be. Now, of course, this leaves people completely adrift. It sounds really exciting to say that you can create your own identity and your own humanity, and you don't have to conform to anybody else's idea of what that is. But what's the ultimate meaning of this creation when you've made it, and you're surrounded by other people who are making stuff up arbitrarily as well? So I think we desperately need, if there is a word from God that addresses us and tells us who in fact we are created to be, then meaning becomes something that we can actually look for and find, rather than simply an arbitrary creation of our own brain. The price of the freedom to create your own meaning is that once you've created it, it doesn't mean anything. It's just something you made up. And how are you going to be in community with other people who all made up their own meaning too? What's the common ground on which we can come together? So, it's become an even more pressing question than it was a decade ago when I wrote that book.
You rightly explain that materialism is a philosophical dead end. You say that from the outset. But then if that is the case, what are the other options then? That's what's surrounding us now. That's the water in which we are swimming. Some of us trying to swim upstream. But what are the other options besides that?
Well, you've got, strangely, neo-paganism is becoming popular. I was going to say there's only three really serious options, and that would be theism, pantheism, and materialism. But paganism, polytheism, people are interested in spirituality as long as it doesn't make too many demands on them, as long as it leaves them free to decide what they want to pick and choose and take from it. So you're seeing various forms of paganism definitely on the rise today, because human beings really can't live without some kind of God to give them meaning. And so materialism, I think, has just given rise to deep spiritual hunger, but without people feeling like there's anything they can use to fill it. But materialism has been the default setting and still is for the West. Pantheism in the East is the belief, it's the exact opposite of materialism, because the material world for the Eastern religion doesn't really exist. It's an illusion. And so you go from matter being the ultimate reality to matter not existing at all. And this has some really serious limitations to it. I'm thinking of a cartoon I saw one time, which I ought to have come up with a digital copy of. But it shows that the disciple has crawled up to the top of the mountain. He's made it up to the top of the mountain to the feet of the guru, and the guru is sitting there, and the guru says, "So, you want freedom from desire, eh? How bad do you want it?" For Eastern religion, the illusion that the material world exists, so that we desire things in it that we can't have and don't satisfy us. This is the source of frustration and suffering and pain. And so the path of enlightenment is to get rid of desire. And if you have no desires, you won't really exist as an individual person anymore. You get reabsorbed back into the ocean. But this whole idea of getting rid of desire being the path to ultimate meaning really falls apart when you actually think about it for a second. So you want freedom from desire, eh? How bad do you want it? This is going around in a pretty vicious circle, kind of like reincarnation, I suppose. Or theism. Do we start with a personal God who, by virtue of being personal and creating a world in which he creates us in his image, so that we are genuine persons as well, that is a possibility that probably doesn't sound very plausible to a lot of modern people. But if that were true, it would give us the possibility of real meaning and real fulfillment that aren't just arbitrary, but that are rooted in reality. Here, the ultimate question is, for the East, your personality is your problem. The fact that you are under the illusion that you are an individual person, that's your problem. And so the path to enlightenment, to nirvana, is get rid of your personality. And on the other hand, in theism, if a personal God created us, then you have the opportunity or the possibility for the fulfillment of personality. It's really strange, people think all religions are just different paths to the same place, because they're not even trying to get to the same place. They're trying to get to very different places. Christianity, the fulfillment of personality, an eternal relationship with a personal creator and with other finite persons in community, versus the extinction of personality as the path to the only kind of peace that's available to us, which is the peace of non-existence as individual persons. I'm not going to give up the chance for the fulfillment of personality unless somebody proves to me beyond any shadow of a doubt that that option isn't available. We desperately need Christianity to be true if we are to be fulfilled as human persons. And so thank God there is really good, solid evidence that it is, which opens up the whole field of apologetics. But we're focused on anthropology right now, the doctrine of man. So the service, one of the couple of services that mere humanity performs is even Christians don't really understand what the biblical doctrine of man is. They don't even know there is such a thing. But C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, G.K. Chesterton all have expository writing in which they spell out a profound and rich biblical anthropology, a biblical understanding of what it is to be human. And then in the fiction, especially for Lewis and Tolkien, they take that concept of humanity and incarnate it so that you don't just read about it and have it explained, but you can encounter it and experience it. For example, in the Narnia books, you have talking beasts. These are rational spiritual creatures, but they're not human. They're not sons of Adam or daughters of Eve. And they create foils that bring out the essence of what it is to be human, because they're like us in ways that other animals, non-talking animals, aren't, but they're not us. The similarities and the differences create a very, very explicit and well worked out, well delineated set of borders around to understand what it is to be human. Is to be like the talking beasts in certain ways, but the unique features that come from being the son of Adam and the daughter of Eve is added to that. In C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, you have now the Fifiltrigi and the Sereni and the Hressa, the Hrosni on Mars, or the Green Lady on Venus, are rational spiritual creatures who are not human. The Green Lady is humanoid, but she's not human. She's not descended from Adam's. There's no connection in blood or genetics between us. So once again, the way these creatures are like us, but also different from us, brings out the essential essence of what it is to be human in a very profound way. And then, of course, in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, you've got elves, dwarves, orcs. You've got these other species that are rational, spiritual beings. I think orcs probably aren't spiritual beings anymore. But elves and dwarves, rational, spiritual beings that aren't human. They're like us in certain ways, but they're different. So both the similarities and the difference, these all create foils, that is, sets us next to something that, for purposes of comparison, it really brings out and offers up to the imagination the concept of humanity that these writers developed in their expository prose. So the book will introduce you to the robust understanding of what it is to be human that comes from Scripture as developed in the history of Christianity. Will help you understand what it is, not first by explaining it, but then also by showing you how to read the fiction of these authors from that point of view in order to see it in operation to get a deeper understanding that way. Also, just to enjoy those stories better by seeing them, that aspect of their meaning. And then the ultimate place we're trying to get to with all that is to understand that there is an alternative to the secular view of man that has legs, that has explanatory power, and the power to create meaning and fulfillment that contrasts with the reduccionism that you end up with inevitably when you have a secular approach. So it's another angle at understanding the superiority of the biblical worldview as an explanation of the world and who we are in the world, the truth of Christianity, and gives us some rich material on one of the questions that's a really serious question in our day. Now, the way this whole thing came about, I was reading the Narnia books, and in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you meet Tumnus the Fawn. He has this little cave, and in it he's got a bookshelf. And in Tumnus's library, there's this book entitled "Is Man a Myth?" And I said, that book needs to exist. I'm going to write it. So that was my original title, "Is Man a Myth?" But the publisher was chicken to use it because they thought people wouldn't get it. And they changed it to "Mere Humanity." But they let me keep the original title as the title of the introduction. Is man a myth? Or do we actually exist? And are we not just left in the void trying to figure out who we are on our own with inadequate resources for doing so? Or is there a message from God that comes to us that in responding to that we discover who we really are? And those are the stark alternatives that face us these days.
I was intrigued when reading your book, this particular book, Mere Humanity. Also, recently I'd read Dr. Charlie Starr's book on, I believe it's called The Fawn's Bookshelf, which deals with not all the same, but some of the same themes. He touches on anthropology, but they made the two books made a nice complement to one another, because he's emphasizing the role that myth plays in helping us understand our place as humans, as man and woman in the world that God has placed us in. So that was it was helpful for me to read both of those, and something that I honestly really like. There's a difference, and I know there's a place for both, but there's a difference between academic books that are merely highlighting an element of a writer and books that are edifying. Now, sometimes a book is either one or the other. Some of my favorite are the ones that serve both at the same time. And your book, I know Mere Humanity, also you have another book, Deeper Magic, The Theology of C.S. Lewis, and others that I've read, it serves as both. It both is edifying and enlightening to help us. I mean, it pulls back some of the layers of grime that may accumulate on our vision that keep us from seeing these works for what they are. I mean, you can read them as good stories, but they're also art, because they are revealing much that is true about us, which is what you've been talking about, what in both of the writers, Tolkien and Lewis. They're revealing things to us that we could not, and would not normally see because we're so accustomed, jaded to living in the world right now as we do.
Yeah, well, that's certainly what I was trying to do, so it's encouraging to hear you say that.
On a side note, you talk about, sorry.
I don't see any point in a book that's merely academic. I've read too many of those.
You talk about, portions along this book, and I know some of your others, you use some of your poems as well to enhance the points that you were making. Now, that's something that very few writers have the courage to do, to put their poems alongside their prose. And it's not at all something, you're not flaunting what you've done. It indeed enhances what you've written and furthers the points that you made in a more succinct and clear way. So what motivated you to use poetry in this? And how does it help to expound your message?
Well, yeah, most people don't do that. It's not a matter of not having the courage. They just don't have any poems to put alongside their prose. But the reason I got started doing that was before my book of poems was published. The market for poetry is just about dead. The poets have killed it. Most contemporary poetry is just arbitrarily fractured. It's prose fractured into arbitrarily short lines, and it's not very poetic, and it's so privatized in its meaning. Nobody can tell what it's about. Why would anybody want to pay good money to read that kind of stuff? So there's no market for poetry today, and as a person who is a serious practitioner of that art, it was like, okay, I'll sneak this stuff into my prose books because that's what the publishing industry will let me publish. And so I came up with the idea of using poems as interludes between the chapters, to put one that kind of gives you an opportunity to pause and reflect on the discussion that's just taken place. But it was purely a matter of trying to be sneaky and get some of these poems past the editors so that people would actually have a chance to find them, because there's just no market for poetry, unfortunately. And one of my dreams is that we can recreate that by there's Malcolm Gleet and myself, and then it drops off after that, as far as I know, as far as Christians writing poetry that is good Christianity and good poetry. That's well written, uses the poetic devices of meter and rhyme, alliteration, assy thingummies, and metaphor and simile, etc. So that was just me being sneaky. But now that of course Stars Through the Clouds, which is my collected poetry, has also been published, I've kept doing it because it's fun. A book is an opportunity to try to say what you've got to say, and say it the best way you can. And some people don't agree, but you and I, and at least a few others, have enjoyed having those poems there. So I'll keep doing it just out of sheer stubbornness.
So are all of your poems gathered in the collection? I believe it's Stars Beyond the Clouds.
Stars Through the Clouds. Stars Through the Clouds. It's a quote from Sam Gamgee.
Okay.
When Sam is in Mordor and he's in despair And let's see if I can get the thing started. I'll be able to quote it if I can remember the first line. Although at journey's end I lie in darkness buried deep, beyond all mountains strong and high, beyond all towers steep, beyond all shadows rides the sun, and stars forever dwell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. Because he has seen this Sauron's darkness, his cloud has broken up, and one star was able to shine through a little hole in the cloud, in the smoke. And Sam saw it, and it gave him hope again. And he spontaneously comes out with that poem. So my hope is that the poems will be stars poking through the clouds of secularism and despair to get us back in touch with the light and with hope today.
That is a beautiful picture. I'd forgotten that poem and we just read that probably in our family as we're reading The Lord of the Rings again in the evenings, and we just came across that within the last week. So that picture where they are just pressing, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think about times in our lives where we're looking and it seems like the clouds have totally blackened out the hope of the stars. But God will often send.
Above all shadows rides the sun, and stars forever dwell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell.
Well, on that.
Good old Sam.
Yes. And on that note, Lewis was himself a poet, not recognized very, very much as one due to his other work, but he has some really good poems.
Yeah, he does. His poems have been published, edited by Don King, and his ambition was to be a great poet, but it wasn't a propitious time for that. It still isn't. And his poetry was totally out of sync with what was being written at that time. That was a period of T.S. Eliot and Prufrock and The Wasteland, and Lewis was writing much more traditional stuff. He's a good poet. Some of it is really, really good. He's got a Christmas poem called The Turning of the Tide that I think is his greatest, as he pictures the universe responding to what's happening in Bethlehem at the birth of Christ, and it's wonderful. So if you've not read Lewis's poetry, it's worth doing, worth checking it out.
So one author that we've not talked about very much yet is Chesterton, who is sort of the precursor to Lewis and Tolkien and all the Inklings. I mean, you can say someone like even Dorothy Sayers, who is not technically a member of the Inklings, but Chesterton laid a lot of the groundwork for what they're doing. So you have a chapter in there on Chesterton and his role and his work in teaching and guiding people in the wisdom of God's plan for humanity. So tell us about that. What did Chesterton do? How did his writing aid in this?
Throughout Lewis's life, if you get the big 3-volume set, almost complete set of Lewis's letters, it's really interesting to trace different things through his life as you work through those. And once he became famous, after the broadcast talks and Screwtape, Lewis became a household name in England and in America. And people would continually be writing him letters asking him, is there anybody else? You know, we read Mere Christianity, we read Miracles, we loved it. Is there anybody else out there who can do this kind of thing for us? And the book he recommended consistently from the moment he first got that question right up until the last weeks of his life was the last time he answered it, was G.K. Chesterton's The Everlasting Man. A great work of apologetics that inspired Lewis and Tolkien, and I trace some of the ideas that they picked up and developed in Mere Humanity from The Everlasting Man. Chesterton, in that book, says, okay, we've got this evolutionary concept of what humanity is now, that we evolved, you know, purposeless evolution, evolved from animals. And so why don't we take that idea more seriously than the evolutionists do and see if it'll work? And so Chesterton said, trying to do that, so okay, you know, if evolution is true, then man is simply a progression, a logical step-by-step progression from what the animals do. But somehow that doesn't fit our experience of who man is. We have dug very deep and we have found a cave where ancient men drew pictures of reindeer on the wall. You will have to dig a whole lot deeper before you find a cave where reindeer have drawn pictures of men. Human beings are not just one evolutionary step down the road from the bonobo. It's like an Evel Knievel leap across a Grand Canyon. That evolution is not capable of launching this trajectory. So whatever may be the story of the role evolution played in the production of our bodies, there was clearly a miracle that took place that made man man. And because man is a miracle. And it's by trying to look at him as simply one more step of evolution that you realize how absurd that idea really is. You know, chimpanzees will have basic intelligence and basic tool-making skills. They will sharpen a stick to dig termites out of a termite nest to eat. They'll arrange boxes into a pile that they can climb up on to get a banana that's suspended from the ceiling of their cage. They will not, though, arrange the sticks or the boxes into a symmetrical pattern just so they can sit back and contemplate it. So Chesterton's conclusion is that art is the signature of man, and it's not an evolution, it's a revolution. You know, birds sing. We call it singing because we're reading what we do into it. The bird's actually just telling the other birds, hey, this is my tree, go find your own. You know, and they all sing the same tune, and man, out of 8 notes, 12 notes, counting the sharps and the flats, keeps generating new music constantly. Language, music, art, it's not an evolution, it's a revolution. That was Chesterton's conclusion. And so the everlasting man, it's like man is a miracle, but man has no explanation until you get to the ultimate man, which is Christ. And so Christ is the everlasting man who reveals to us what it is to be human, which is among other things, to be part of the race which he redeems, which has fallen and which he redeems. And you don't understand man unless you understand those things as well. So Lewis and Tolkien both built on that foundation. Chesterton, along with George MacDonald, Chesterton is the other main literary influence that led to Lewis's conversion, as he details in Surprised by Joy. And Tolkien's doctrine of subcreation is right out of Chesterton. So, yeah, he was pretty important. And that book's just worth reading for its own sake, not just as a precursor to Lewis and Tolkien.
Yeah, yes. That was one that in a class that I taught at one time, or I was tutoring a student, and we read some of H.G. Wells' work on history, and then we read Chesterton's Everlasting Man, which was written in response to Wells. And I really like what Chesterton does, because Hilaire Belloc also wrote against Wells, but it became very much it was an angry kind of tit for tat back and forth that Wells and Belloc had, whereas Chesterton, while he still clearly contradicted Wells' view of history, he did so with, I guess the best way I know how to say it, with a little bit more grace than Belloc displayed. And I'm not saying that there's only...
A good bit more grace and wit.
Yes. The Everlasting Man is a delight to read. There's joy there.
It really is, So what you're saying is that Hilaire Belloc should have had less bellicosity and more hilarity.
Yes, exactly. Precisely. Now, you go beyond in your books just the cultural apologetics, which many people, that's what they hone in on, is merely how do these writers, in this case Chesterton and Tolkien and Lewis and others, how do they help us right now answer the questions that that a secular culture is presenting? But you don't stop there. You deal with that, but then you proceed and further help us to see how the virtues serve in their role of us becoming who God made us to be. So talk about just the role of Christian virtue and growing in that, in becoming human.
Well, the Christian life is a life. And we won't be convincing with our verbal apologetics unless people can see what we're saying exemplified in our lives. And we don't live lives that are on the quest of ever more Christ-likeness. We don't do that. We don't do that for pragmatic reasons to make our apologetics more effective. We do it because Christ is the one who is altogether lovely, because Christ is the ultimate expression of the goodness, the justice, the grace, the love, and the mercy of God. The glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ is the thing for the sake of which the universe exists and for the sake of which we exist. And so if your Christianity is just a fire insurance policy to get you out of going to hell, I mean, that's taking one of the fringe benefits of it and making it the main thing. The main thing is Christ himself. And so the Christian life and Christian discipleship is a lifelong process of being transformed into his image, becoming more Christ-like, and coming to see more of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ and having more of it shine out from us. It's pretty grandiose stuff to say. I've got miles to go before I sleep in pursuit of it. And I pursue it. I pursue it very stumblingly, but I'm stumbling, I hope, in that direction. And that is worth doing for its own sake, and then it has the fringe benefit of making our words have credibility. I think Francis Schaeffer was one of the most effective apologists of the 20th century, not just because of the quality of his work, although he had some really brilliant analysis, but people went to L'Abri. The L'Abri Fellowship was the ministry Schaeffer had in Switzerland, and they participated in the discussions, and they heard the cultural apologetics, and they heard the answers to their questions, and they heard them in a context of a community that was living these things out, and a community that shouldn't be there, because L'Abri never did any fundraising. They just prayed, and answers to prayer would happen that let them keep going. And so you're surrounded by these people who, if God doesn't answer prayer, there's no way these people should be here. And you're watching that happen, and that's the context in which you're hearing the message. And so it's the reality of the Christian life manifested in a holistic manner that always is what makes the message of the gospel powerful. And if we don't have that, we don't have anything. So to see a vision of who Christ is the ultimate thing for which we were created, and it's meant to be reflected in the totality of life and the totality of culture. And Schaeffer was the great apostle of that idea at the end of the 20th century.
He is someone who has influenced my own vision of what is possible when someone will both, has a head knowledge of Christ, but also walks in and demonstrates faith. So that's played a great role for me, and it's my own hope that I can demonstrate faith like that in time. So turning back a little bit, we've talked about this, we've talked around it, it's come out in things that you've said, but, and you've written about this topic here and elsewhere, but how can reading good literature help our discipleship, help us become more like Christ?
Well, let me start by simply noting that when God decided to reveal himself to us, now he does it in many ways. He does it in nature. The heavens declare the glory of God. He does it in history. He does it ultimately in Christ. But the book, which is just amazing, and its book is made out of literature. The Bible has some systematic theology in Romans and Ephesians, but most of it is history. Most of it is poetry, the Psalms. Most of it is, Jesus' primary way of communicating was by what? Parables, telling stories. Okay? So if God chose to reveal himself to the story-creating creature, man, whose life is a story. One of the great lines from evolution from everlasting man is that Chesterton talking about the fact that human history is a story with a plot. The history of cows in 12 volumes would not make very exciting reading. But God chose through story to reveal himself. Now, out of that material, we legitimately and necessarily derive systematic theology, but the Bible comes to us in that form. And so there's something very human about that. And Tolkien, I think, in the essay on fairy stories, has the explanation that really pulls this together and nails it down. That man is creative because he's created in the image of the Creator. Although now long estranged, man is not wholly lost nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship once he owned. Man, sub-creator, the refracted light through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. What though every cranny of the earth we filled with gods and goblins, though we dared with elves and dragons, though we dared to build gods in their houses out of dark and light, and sowed the seed of dragons, 'twas our right, used or misused. That right has not decayed. We make still by the law in which we're made, as Tolkien summarized it. We make still by the law in which we're made. We're creative. That's the main thing that makes us unique and different from the other animals, that our creativity is at a different level. You know, robins make nests, but they all make the same nest. Men make 11 to 12 different kinds of houses with 37 different styles to each one, and houses and tents and yurts and cave. I mean, it's just, Chesterton said, you know, if a robin ever started building like a human being, we would totally freak out, because that would be a fearful wildfowl indeed. So the very human nature is that we are the creature whose history is a story. And we show that by being people who create stories as our way of expressing meaning. So literature comes from the very heart of who we are as people. Even people who don't like to read like to hear a good story or watch a good story in the cinema. So story is an essential way that human beings create and access meaning and find meaning. The way you understand the meaning of your life is by the story you tell yourself, with yourself as the central character in your life. So if you want to understand a culture, a people, listen to their stories. Okay? And literature is the preservation of the human story and the human stories that have been told, which allows us to do that. I've got a book called Inklings of Reality, Essays Toward a Christian Philosophy of Letters, which goes into that in great detail. But when you're reading the great literature of the human race, you're encountering the best of man's recorded experience with and attempts to figure out the meaning of life. And now, you need to have Scripture as the plumb line that is the standard of discerning truth from error. But literature will give meaning to the truth and the error and let you understand them in really, really important and in significant ways that cut to the heart. So the better you are at reading literature, the better you'll be at reading Scripture, which is made out of literature. And the better you will understand what's going on around you and understand the history of the human race.
Well, this has been really enjoyable. and I appreciate the time you've taken to talk. The last thing I'll ask before we go is you've got your most recent book is called Answers from Aslan, and so just
Answers from Aslan: The Enduring Apologetics of C.S. Lewis.
So just tell us a little bit about that.
It's published by J.R.R, the same publishing company that did Mere Humanity. Basically, I go through Lewis's apologetics. I deal with 7 different arguments, and I look at their strengths and weaknesses. I look at the criticisms that have been made of them and whether they can be met. And I conclude Lewis's arguments are still good, but the world has changed radically since Lewis was writing. It's been 80 years. I mean, miracles, problem of pain, mere Christianity, we're World War II. That's 80 years ago. And the world has changed a lot since then. For example, when Lewis is doing the moral argument for theism in Mere Christianity, he says, well, nobody's going to say, to hell with your standard. They'll pretend that they actually meant it or that there was some excuse why they didn't need to. But they're not going to say, to hell with your standard. Well, today, there's lots of people that are ready to say that. So Lewis's argument is still valid. It's still a good argument, but you may need to add an extra step or two in order for it to be able to connect with the audience that exists now. So what I do is I take Lewis's arguments and I go through and evaluate them and explain them, evaluate them, and then I say, okay, how do we present this for our audience, the audience that exists today? So instead of just learning to parrot Lewis, we're learning from what Lewis did in his generation, letting Lewis teach us how to do our own apologetic for our own, in our own voice, for our own audience, our own generation. And if this book can help Lewis do that, then I think we will do some good. So that's what Answers from Aslan is all about.
That sounds really good and something that we need. So I appreciate your writing. Dr. Williams, thank you for taking time with us today. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine, and I don't even work for Chick-fil-A, so I can
thank you.
Say that honestly.
The Good Life podcast is a ministry of Trinity Reformed Church in Huntsville, Alabama. If you like this podcast, you might enjoy one of our other podcasts, Got a Minute, featuring Larson Hicks and Rich Lusk. Theology, philosophy, economics, politics, and more for normal people.